This morning I'm going to be talking about obtaining spiritual maturity. The reason we had this exercise this morning is because spiritual maturity requires stability. Isn't that interesting? So the whole talk today is going to be about how to obtain spiritual maturity through stability. Spiritual maturity can occur only when we live a life that is stable. So that's the first declaration. You know, if you think that you are spiritually mature, physically, emotionally, mentally, and of course spiritually, that means your life is stable. But it must be stable on all, particularly the three accounts. Stable physically, stable emotionally, stable mentally. And it is through that stability we make breakthroughs. And it is the breakthrough that leads us to spiritual maturity. Instability, on the other hand, keeps our consciousness anchored in obstacles and hindrances. And if we are anchored in these obstacles and hindrances, then we're not going to be able to make a breakthrough. To obtain spiritual maturity, we must make breakthroughs. Are you getting dizzy yet? So, spiritual breakthroughs require stability. Stability leads to spiritual maturity. Okay, so we're set, right? Okay. Many pupils were studying meditation under a Zen master. One of them used to arise at night, climb over the temple wall, and go to town on a pleasure jaunt. The Zen master, inspecting the dormitory quarters, found this pupil missing one night and also discovered the high stool he had used to scale the wall. The master removed the stool and stood there in its place. When the wanderer returned, not knowing that the master was the stool, he put his feet on the master's head and jumped down onto the grounds. Discovering what he had done, he was aghast. The Zen master said, "Well, it's very chilly in early morning. Do be careful not to catch a cold yourself." The pupil never went out at night again. Breakthroughs can be accomplished if we have stable ground. You must have stable emotions, mind, and heart, stable friendships, and respect for others. If this kind of stability exists in your life, then you will have spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is a consciousness that can soar to great heights. You see, in the story, the Zen master showed spiritual maturity to his pupil. Rather than delivering a punishment, he reflected what it means to be a stable person, one who stands on stable ground. If your foundation is not stable, you cannot build anything upon it. On unstable ground, on unstable character, on unstable thinking and consciousness, you cannot build anything. it is usually pretty easy to see such instability in others. But is there any instability within your own nature that is preventing your spiritual maturity? So I'll be sharing ideas today from the teaching, ideas showing us how to stabilize things within us so that we can build stability. The spiritual life is not a game. It is very hard work, and sometimes even embarrassing. Sometimes it means great defeats. Sometimes great failures wait on our path. And why is that? This is something to really think about. I mean, it really gave me cause for pause. Anyway, sometimes great failures wait upon our path, which is to test our stability in our higher self. So if you can relate to what I'm saying here this morning to the exercise we had in stability, you're going to see how it all comes together. You're going to remember when you are facing failure in your life, hopefully you will go back in recollection to this exercise this morning. The marbles, in a straight line, or in the pentacle, five-pointed star, or in the circle. If you just think about this exercise, when you're in the middle of so-called failure, how are you handling it? Are you remaining in balance? Are you stabilizing yourself? Okay, you can ask yourself questions like this. What have I done to cause my success? What characteristics do I have that have contributed to my various successes, like music, art, lecturing and speaking, business, sports, or other talents that have contributed to any of your successes? In all of these successes, during your time of success, you probably would have been at some point praised, applauded, and loved, even admired. However, and you know I'm coming to this point, however, during any of those times, did you ever lose your stability? In other words, during the times that you were building your successes, did you ever find yourself losing your stability? For example, perhaps there were some times that you did not perform well in a musical performance, or you could not recall the music you memorized for an audition and failed, or you made mistakes in giving a lecture, or you became frozen with fear because of someone in the audience. Perhaps you failed a final exam in college. But even in your failing, you never lost your stability. That is spiritual maturity. See, you did not lose your stability when you failed. Do you see it? Can you think of these times in your life? Those times that you didn't remain stable, but the times that you did, that led you to success. So oftentimes people, when they're in their middle years, middle age, 30s, 40s, 50s, are very successful. But there are also other people who may have achieved success in their 20s or early 30s. And then they stayed at that point of achievement. Why? Why did they stay and not grow their success? Because they were given a test and they failed because they were unstable. Other people feel that once they've achieved one success, they've made it. And that in itself is failure and instability, because there are higher stabilities, higher successes. We want our soul to soar to the higher worlds. But if through our striving we stop early on in life, the rest of our life will be filled with illusion and delusion and despair and depression, because we were stuck. Okay? Being stuck means we became unstable. There are higher stabilities. There is stability in, for example, in meditation. Your mind is stable in meditation. But there are people who cannot meditate. And why is that? Because they are unstable. How can we build spiritual mansions within ourselves, when there is no stability? If the person is what we call low life, that person will have manifested instability in his mind, in his heart, in his emotions, even in his words and actions and expressions. So what does that mean? If a person has fear or anger or hatred or jealousy in his heart, there is no stability. Right? Okay. If you have vanity, ego, showing off, or separatism in your mind, there is no mental stability. If you have revenge and slander and treason in your heart, there is no stability. If you have greed in your mind, there is no stability. Our consciousness becomes stable when it is in the right condition. When a person is defeated or attacked by his vipers, then he cannot be stable. And an unstable mind cannot meditate. Well, here's a funny story. Yet it is a story of vanity, ego, and impatience versus a stable mind. A businessman needing to attend a conference in a faraway city decided to travel on country roads rather than the freeways so that he could enjoy a relaxing journey. After some hours of traveling, he realized that he was hopelessly lost. Seeing a farmer tending his field on the side of the road, he stopped to ask for directions. "Can you tell me how far it is to Chicago?" he asked the farmer. "Well, I don't rightly know." The farmer replied, "Well, can you tell me how far I am from New York?" The businessman questioned again. "Well, I don't rightly know." The farmer again replied, "Well, can you at least tell me the quickest way to the main road?" The exasperated businessman asked, "No, I don't rightly know," the farmer again answered. "Well, you don't?" really know very much at all, do you? Blurted the impatient businessman. Nope, but I ain't lost, the farmer calmly answered. Stability is like a wheel. When it is turning 200 revolutions per minute, you can see the spokes. If it is turning 1,000 revolutions per minute, the spokes appear to stand still. But if you put your finger there, it will disappear. The point is this: stability is the highest motion. Yet it appears to stand still. This reminds me in the Agni Yoga teaching, where it emphasizes that it is not appropriate to be passionate. And I was recalling a young woman who admonished a study group leader one day, because she had visited that study group, saying, "You're not passionate enough. You need to be passionate to get your students to listen." But what happens? In that kind of passion, you become unstable. See, to be stable means to have a stable heart, a stable mind, to bring in that fiery energy. So it is the fiery energy of Agni that creates enthusiasm and prepares that mental field to absorb the teaching. Whereas if you have that passionate teacher, that student will be so distracted by the passion of the personality, they won't hear the teaching. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it was to me. Yeah. Your speed makes you appear to stand still or be motionless. So in certain ways, we are going to raise our stability to higher planes. Stability in meditation and eventually stability in contemplation. Master Morya says that Uruzvati, who was Helena Rourke, was stable in the space when electrical and magnetic storms were raging. When a person says something to you about you that's ugly, do you lose your stability? Do you lose your spiritual maturity? You cannot build great mansions in your soul if your foundation is unstable. And you certainly cannot build great mansions in the souls of people if their foundation is unstable. So in the case of the woman that felt like passionate teaching was the only way to teach, what was happening indeed was she was creating instability in the minds of the students because they were attaching themselves to her personality and not absorbing the teaching. And the teaching helps us to create stability. See, not the personality of a human being. So there are different types of stability. Physical stability is health. If you are healthy, you are physically stable. If your heart is in the right place, if your stomach is working, and your organs are okay, then you are physically stable. So health is stability. If we do not have good health, we do not have physical stability. So the first thing we must work for in this life is to create a stable ground upon which we can build. So for example, let's say that you have poor health. Then you must create an environment, which means to educate yourself, to create a stable ground upon which to build or rebuild or reconstruct your health. So you can't, it's like this is why we have symptoms, health symptoms. Symptoms are a warning. It's like inflammatory issues in the body. These are warnings or symptoms that your body is becoming unstable. Too often people just say, oh, I'm not going to think about it. I have too much to do. Until eventually you don't have too much to do anymore because your physical health is taking your entire attention. So we have to pay attention to the signs. And if the signs are, we need to get our heart back in order. We need to take a look at why our digestion isn't working, and so on and so forth. Then we're going to get ourselves back in order, which means to recreate stability in our physical health. Eat well, drink well, sleep well. Sleep well. Sleeping well is as important as good digestion. Is as important, I can't talk, is as important as your heart beating with the right rhythm and your brain working. It's why, because during your sleep, we need a good 6 or 7 hours of sleep, sometimes 8, in order to function throughout the day and to be clear thinking. If our sleep is continuously interrupted, or we only get 2 or 3 hours of sleep at night, ultimately we are going to create instability in our health. So sleep is as important as our digestion. Mental stability. The teaching explains to us that if anyone has a wrong motive in a relationship with any person, with any job, or with anything, he will never have a stable mind. There's going to be conflict, which I talked about a couple of weeks ago. Our motives must be pure and correct, open and sincere. Why did you shake my hand? Why did you do those things for me? If you have wrong motives, the teaching explains that you will never be able to build your divine mansions, the temple built without hands. This is why in the exercise this morning we were told, don't hold those marbles with your hands, don't rearrange them into those different designs with your hands, but with your thought. The temple is built without hands. Christ referred to this when he said that each of us has a temple within us that is built without hands. So that temple is our future. We can never build that divine temple within us if our mind and soul are not stable. If our mind, if our life is in a continuous earthquake state, we cannot build anything. Our motive must be totally clear and pure. You know, some people, putting this in more of an exoteric language. I was talking with one of the women on staff this week about how important right choices are. Before we make a major decision, before we make a choice, we need to consider all elements that will, once that decision is made, lead us into a successful future. When we look at our life and see this mistake and this mistake and this mistake that has led us to no success whatsoever, we need to regroup. Regroup, because why? We cannot say, life is just doing this to me. I don't know why this is happening. I guess life doesn't care about me. And life is putting me in these failing situations. And by the time you get to 40 or 50 or 80 or 90, what happens? Well, I don't know. Life did these things to me. Life forced me into making these choices and decisions. And that means that we're not listening to the inner guidance that every single person has. It's not you guiding me, it is my soul guiding me. It is that inner presence that if we can create stability in our life, it is that inner presence that says, this is the decision you must make. And how that is done is that our conscience, our solar angel, knows our plan, knows our purpose. But if somebody else, whether it is a mom or a dad or a teacher or a stranger, says, no, you can't do this, this is what I want you to do, then you stop listening to that inner presence. And no mansions are going to be built. No temple is going to be there for you to live in. So let me repeat this. Christ referred to this when he said that each of us has a temple within us that is built without hands. If a very advanced psychiatrist were to examine the public, maybe 80%, this is from the teaching, maybe 80% of them would be admitted to a mental institution. I know, shocking. There is a lot of mental instability in the world today. We've even seen it on stage lately in the different political debates. Instability is a contagious disease. To be free from this disease, we must have right motives in our mind. Let us say that you married a person with the right motive. You have a child with the right motive. You love your husband with the right motives. You love your friends, your teacher, and everything that you are related with. This creates stability in your mind. You see, the temple is proceeding. One day the sage Mullah Nasruddin was asked if he ever thought of marriage. He replied by saying, Nasruddin, by the way, was famous back in the 1300s. And oftentimes his stories are used by the Sufi tradition. Anyway, Nasruddin replied by saying yes, that in his youth he very much wanted to marry. He explained that he waited for a perfect wife for himself. He traveled a long way looking for her. In Damascus, he met a beautiful woman who was gracious and kind and deeply spiritual, but she had no worldly knowledge. He traveled further, where he met a woman who was both spiritual and worldly, beautiful in many ways, but they did not communicate well. Then finally, in Cairo, he found her. She was spiritually deep, graceful, and beautiful in every respect, at home in the world and at home in the realms beyond this world. He said, I had found the perfect wife. His questioning friend further asked, then did you not marry her, Mullah? Alas, said Nasruddin as he shook his head, she was, unfortunately, waiting for the perfect husband. We must have a plan for our life to be stable. We may be retired, or we may have a level of wealth that precludes working for a living. But it does not matter. What matters is that we have a plan. What are you living for? Is there something in your mind for which you are living? Or are you just living because you don't have a choice to do anything else? We must have a plan, because without a plan, we are unstable. We're going to need a plan, and we are going to need to stick to that plan. These things are very spiritual. Our mind stabilizes itself when we have right motives and a beautiful plan that is not only good for us, but also good for others. A stable person for us is a refuge. He stands on his principles, on his directions, and in his visions. You cannot move that man or woman from their stability. It is a great gift to have a friend who is stable. Truly a great gift. When I was thinking this week, when there was so much chaos around me, so much instability, all I had to do was to think of this one person who represented stability to me, and I remained stable in the chaos. The curse of life is instability. Let's say that you love someone and the next day he or she turns in 100 different directions. You love a man, but he does very obnoxious things. See, he is unstable. Some women will say, yeah, he's unstable, but he loves me. Well, I know he's obnoxious, but he loves me. Instability is contagious. When we are trying to build a temple, but the bricks are continuously moving, how can we complete the temple? The teaching says that instability is worse than cancer. Emotional stability can be accomplished by first practicing steadfastness. Also, clear sensitivity is a second method to establish emotional stability. So we have steadfastness and clear Say, for example, a person left your home or office or party without even saying goodbye. And you watched him go out the door, and you begin to feel upset, and then that feeling of upsetness increased. You want to stop yourself and ask yourself, is this upset impression, was it coming from the person who walked out of your party without saying goodbye? Or were you projecting yourself and feeling your own muddy feelings? If these are muddy feelings that you projected from your own self, this creates instability. Doesn't make any difference if the party is the best party you ever put on. In other words, if you when that person walked out the door without saying goodbye, and you let your own muddy feelings take over, then that whole evening created instability in your emotional body. When you practice these things and observe them, you will see how beautiful your relationships are in your family, your friendships, and in your group. When you have pure sensitivity, then your registration is going to become pure. When that man walked out the front door, he was a stranger. He didn't know what the heck this party and who was running it or anything. He just left. Or maybe he was invited, but nobody was there that he knew. Or maybe there was somebody there that he knew and he didn't want to be around. And so he left. See, if your sensitivity is clear, you will know why he left, and it didn't affect your feelings. Your registration is pure. Responsibility causes your astral body to be very stable. So now we're adding responsibility to steadfastness and clear sensitivity. When you analyze the problems of youth today, you will find one basic cause. Most of them are irresponsible. They are irresponsible toward their bodies, toward their future, in their jobs, and in their families. When children are 2 or 3 years old, we must start teaching them responsibility. For example, my grandchildren are visiting me this last couple of weekends, along with their other set of grandparents. We were all enjoying ourselves, playing different games, including building things with Legos. Remember Legos? They have gotten very small. Couldn't believe it. Anyway, that's kind of a side note. When it came time for them to leave and return to Phoenix with their grandparents, Grandma told them, "We cannot leave until you put everything nicely back into the boxes. And that way, when we return, you will know where they will be and nothing will be lost." And they did so, without irritation or rolling their eyes to the back of their head. They were obedient and were taught the importance of taking responsibility of their new games. So guess what? The first thing when they came in the door of my house, they ran upstairs and went right to where they had left the games. They were so excited because they knew right where they were going to be, and they were all put together. All those Legos. When you ask children to wash the dishes, you can also ask them to put the dishes back onto the shelves. This is giving them responsibility and preparing them for the future. Striving is another way to create emotional stability. Striving is to gain more and more control over our body, emotions, thinking, and eventually brings us to the highest vision within us into actualization. So to be someone spiritually, we are going to work for it. To be spiritually mature, we are going to work for it. We cannot pretend that we are holy. We cannot pretend that we are a Christ or a Buddha or a Krishna. We are going to do heavy work for it. The heaviest labor will be upon ourselves. The teaching explains that, quote, you are the greatest enemy of yourself. Once you understand this, everything will be very clear to you. You are your hindrances. You are your obstacles. You are 80% of the enemy of your own success and future stability. If you find this, you will not put yourself on a stage and start worshiping yourself. Most of humanity is now going through very severe phases of emotional instability. We see this in governments, in cities, even in leadership. They are emotionally unstable. Think of this, if the emotions are unstable, the body, the heart, and the mind, the body, the heart, and mind will also be unstable. So just observe, and you can see the truth in this. If you want to become spiritually mature, you must become a stable human being. Remember in the beginning of the talk when I said stability is the foundation of every kind of success, creativity, and progress. If we do not cultivate stability, we cannot be spiritually or reach spiritual maturity. It's a powerful, powerful talk this morning.